Welcome back to Coach's Read. We are going to continue with Help, I'm Trapped in My Gym Teacher's Body by Todd Strasser. We left off at chapter 10, and so we're going to continue with chapter 11, and we're probably going to read a few more chapters to try to get a little further into the book. All right, chapter 11. Sneaking around like that isn't going to solve your problems, Mr. Braun was sitting next to his dark green metal desk. Alex and I were sitting in two old wooden chairs across from him. The desk was covered with papers, a phone, and a photograph of a really pretty blonde woman. I assumed she was Bertha, Mr. Braun's girlfriend. The photo only showed her face, but I could see why she was a contestant for the Miss Galaxy pageant. Like Josh had said, she was really pretty. All you're doing is making Dunn madder, Mr. Braun went on. And the madder he gets, the more he's going to pick on people. And since he doesn't know who tied his shoes to the toilet, he's going to pick on everyone. How do you know who did it? Alex asked. A little birdie told me, Mr. Braun said. Alex and I shared a defeated look. There were a couple of teachers' pets in the class who could always be counted on to squeal. So what are you going to do to us? Alex asked. The question is, what are you going to do about it, Barry Dunn? Mr. Braun replied. Until one of you little runts stands up to him, he's going to keep picking on everyone. Barry would kill us, Alex said. Why don't you stand up to him? That's not my job, Silver. It's yours. Well, most of the time we manage to fake him out, I said. Maybe we don't have to have big muscles, but Barry's not too big in the brain department. It kind of balances out. Or maybe you've just been lucky, Mr. Braun said. Brains will get you just so far, Sherman. One of these days, it's going to come down to mano a mano. Your fist will have to do the talking. You'll have to act like a man. Bzzz, outside the bell rang. Alex sighed and shook his head hopelessly. The idea of trying to fight Barry Dunn was ridiculous. He was the biggest, strongest kid at Burpitt Middle School. Well, thanks for the advice, Mr. Braun, Alex said a little sarcastically as he rose from his chair. School's over. Can we go, or is this like detention? Rap, rap. Before Mr. Braun could answer, someone knocked on the gym door. The door swung open, and Mr. Dirksen, the science teacher, stuck his head in. What can I do for you, Phil? Mr. Braun asked. I have to move something heavy into the gym for the science fair, Mr. Dirksen said, looking more at Alex and me than Mr. Braun, and I was hoping to find a few strong backs. Mr. Braun smiled at Alex. Looks like the answer to your question is yes, Silver. This is detention. And while you're here, you can help Mr. Dirksen move his stuff. Go get your coats, boys. It's snowing outside. Chapter 12. Alex and I got our coats and followed Mr. Dirksen out to the parking lot. It had started to snow really hard. The white stuff was coming down so fast that we couldn't even see the far end of the parking lot. So, Jake, having a good year? Mr. Dirksen asked as we trekked through the snow. Not really, I said. Why not? He asked. Barry Dunn's a major pain. Mr. Dirksen nodded. He and I had accidentally switched bodies in 6th grade. After that, I had to behave better in school. Mr. Dirksen had gotten a toupee and tried to be less boring. He improved, but the old saying still applied. Once a dweeb, always a dweeb. We stopped next to a yellow rented van, and Mr. Dirksen opened the back locks. Inside was some familiar-looking science equipment. It's the experiment, I said. You finally got it to work. Mr. Dirksen's experiment was supposed to transfer intelligence from one creature to another, but it accidentally switched people's bodies instead. Not only had I gotten stuck in Mr. Dirksen's body, but Andy had once switched bodies with my dog, Lance. I believe I have, Jake, said Mr. Dirksen. At the science fair tomorrow, I hope to show that I can transfer trained behavior from one mouse to another. Alex had taken a computer monitor out of the van and was trudging through the snow back to the gym. I stepped closer to Mr. Dirksen. So you fixed it so it won't make people switch bodies anymore? I asked in a low voice. Absolutely, Jake, Mr. Dirksen assured me. That will never happen again. Chapter 13. It wasn't long before we carried all the equipment into the gym and started to set it up. The experiment was so big that we had to push 2 plywood tables together. We were in the middle of assembling everything when Principal Blanco came in. He was a former gym teacher, a short, pudgy man with short, curly black hair. He was wearing a green parka with a fur-lined hood. After-school activities are canceled, he announced. The snow's knocking down power lines all over the place. Some of us have long trips home, and we're not going to make it if we wait much longer. How are you boys going to get home? I'll call my mom, Alex said. We got a four-wheel drive. Alex went out to the payphone in the hall. Principal Blanco turned to Mr. Dirksen. What about you, Phil? I guess I'll head home now, Mr. Dirksen said. Mr. Braun came out of the office. Why don't you go home too? He said to Principal Blanco. I live only a few blocks away. I'll wait here until the boys get picked up. Thanks, Teddy. I appreciate it, Principal Blanco said. Make sure you lock up tight. I've never heard anyone call Mr. Braun by his first name. Teddy? Talk about a weenie name. Pretty soon, the only people left in the gym were Alex, Mr. Braun, and me. Having nothing better to do, I kept assembling Mr. Dirksen's experiment. I assembled it with him once before and pretty much knew where everything went. It was kind of fun, like putting together a big model. Oh man, Alex suddenly groaned. I didn't tell my mom which entrance to use. She's going to go to the main entrance instead of the gym. Can you call her? Mr. Braun asked. No, she's probably left by now. Alex pulled on his coat. I have to go outside and flag her down. Alex went outside, leaving Mr. Braun and me alone in the gym. It was really quiet. This is some contraption, Mr. Braun said, looking over at Mr. Dirksen's experiment. How do you know where everything goes? I told him how I had helped Mr. Dirksen put it together once before. Mr. Braun wanted to know what it did and how it worked, so I explained as best I could. And explained it again and again because he didn't catch on too quickly. Meanwhile, I plugged the heavy black electrical cables into wall sockets. I wanted to make sure I'd connected everything correctly. Lights came on and the machine began to hum. Wow, said Mr. Braun. Vroom. Suddenly the lights went out and Mr. Dirksen's experiment stopped humming. The gym went totally black. It was a weird sensation, almost like you didn't know which way was up. Sherman? Mr. Braun asked. It was so dark that I couldn't see him. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. Yeah? A power line must have come down, he said. Don't worry. The school put in a new emergency generator over the summer. It should kick on any second. Vroom. The next thing I knew, an explosion knocked me off my feet. Chapter 14. What happened? A voice asked in the dark. It sounded too young to be Mr. Braun's. Who said that? I was groggy and dizzy and wondered if I had been unconscious for a few moments. The air smelled funny and my voice sounded strange, much deeper than usual. Maybe my ears had been messed up by the explosion. I did, the voice said. Who are you? I asked. Mr. Braun. Who else? Still in a daze, I pushed myself up to my feet. For some strange reason, my clothes felt tight. I wished I could see, but everything was pitch black. Something must have gone wrong with the emergency generator, Mr. Braun said. You okay? I guess. But I wasn't okay. Something was definitely weird. Not only did the clothes I was wearing feel tight, but my hair felt different. I ran my hand over my jaw. I had stubble. Sherman? Mr. Braun's voice had a tinge of uncertainty, as if he had just felt his jaw. I think something strange is going on. In the dark, I felt my arms. They were huge and bulging. My stomach was as hard as a washboard. My neck felt like a tree trunk. There was only one explanation. It had happened again. Chapter 15. Meanwhile, Mr. Braun was talking to himself in the dark. These are my clothes. There has to be a light somewhere. I need a mirror. Something crazy is going on. What happened to my voice? Down at the other end of the gym, a door creaked open. Jake? Mr. Braun? Alex called into the dark. You guys okay? Yeah, I called back. Your mom here? Not yet, Mr. Braun, Alex replied. But all the lights went out. I heard an explosion. I came in to make sure everything was all right. Everything's fine, I said. Go wait for your mom. We'll be out in a second. The door creaked shut. The gym was still pitch black. What's going on, Sherman? My voice quavered. You better call me Mr. Braun, I said. We'd switched bodies. The funny thing was, the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. What are you talking about? He asked. You're not me. I am. Not anymore. The door at the end of the gym creaked again. Guys, Alex called. She's here. Come on, we better go, I said. Go where, Mr. Braun? I asked in the dark. I'm not going with you. I'm going home. You're not old enough to drive, I said. Get off it, Sherman. I told you to call me Mr. Braun. Hey, you guys coming or what? Alex called from the other side of the gym. I don't know. I don't know what this is about, Sherman, but I've had enough of this game. Unless you want to clean the bathroom with a toothbrush for the rest of the year, you better tell me what's going on. You wouldn't believe me. I started to feel my way around the plywood tables in the dark. Every time I bumped into one, it made a squeak as my legs scraped on the gym floor. Hey, where are you going? Mr. Braun in my body called behind me. Out of the gym. I'm not spending the night here. But I can't find my keys. I reached into Mr. Braun's pocket and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. They jingled them in the dark. They're right here. Give them to me. No way, Sherman. Don't call me Sherman, Mr. Braun snarled. Squeak! Ow! He must have banged into a table. Careful, Sherman, I said. That's my body you're banging around. Stop calling me Sherman, he shouted. I'm Braun, and when I get you, you're going to be sorry. What's with you guys? Alex called from the other end of the gym. Sherman's just a little freaked, I guess. I am not, he shouted. Squeak! He banged into another table. Ow! Take it easy, Sherman, I said. You're going to pay for this. Squeak! Ow! Hey, Jake, chill, Alex said. Don't call me. Boom! Suddenly the lights went back on. I had to squint in the brightness, but as my eyes adjusted, I looked down at myself. I was wearing Mr. Braun's sweatpants and a dark blue polo shirt. I had his massive arms, legs, and hands. Then squeezed my arms. With my fingers, he felt my face. Then, with an expression of total disbelief and astonishment, he looked across the gym at me. Myself. No. I don't believe it, he gasped. Don't believe what? Alex asked from the doorway. Sherman and I switched bodies, Mr. Braun cried. What? Alex looked at him like he was crazy. Sherman bumped his head, I said. I think he's a little confused. Mr. Braun's jaw dropped and his eyes widened. Why, you... In my body, he charged between the tables at me. Chapter 16. He tried to hit me, but I grabbed him by the shirt collar and held him back. He started hitting my arm, but it didn't hurt much. It was kind of depressing. I never realized what a weakling I was. Chill out, Jake, Alex warned. You can't hit Mr. Braun. You're going to get suspended. He stopped swinging and glared at Alex. I'm telling you, for the last time, I'm not Jake. I'm Ted Braun. Alex frowned and glanced quizzically at me. Head trauma, I said. Alex nodded gravely. Come on, Jake. My mom's waiting. We got to go. I have to come with you, I said. The line in Alex's forehead deepened. Why, Mr. Braun? My car doesn't have snow tires, I said. I'll never make it home. Well, okay, I guess I can drop you off at your place, Alex said. That was a problem. I didn't know where Mr. Braun lived, and I really didn't want to go there anyways. I better go home with Jake and make sure he's okay, I said. Alex gave me a puzzled look. Then I looked at Jake, who was staring at me. You really want me to stay in your apartment tonight? I whispered to him. Mr. Braun blinked as if he hadn't thought about that. I couldn't blame him. I'd been through this once before, but Mr. Braun had never been in someone else's body. He shook his head. No. Chapter 17. A little while later, Mrs. Silver turned her Jeep down Magnolia Street. It was dark, and all we could see were millions of flakes in her car's headlights. On the radio, we had heard through the storm it would probably continue through the night. Bet we'll have a snow day tomorrow, Alex said happily from the front seat. You want to shovel driveways? It was clear that he was addressing Jake, but Mr. Braun in my body was gazing out the window, not paying attention. I gave him a nudge with his elbow. Huh? He turned. Silver asked if you want to shovel driveways tomorrow. Jake frowned. It looked like he was going to say no. Maybe you'll want to talk in the morning, I suggested. Okay, Alex nodded. Mrs. Silver pulled up in front of my house. I reached for the door. Thanks for the ride, Mrs. Silver. You're welcome, Mr. Braun, Alex's mother replied. Mr. Braun and I got out of the car and started up the walk. The drifts were deep and difficult to walk through. Blowing snow stung our faces. Wait a minute. Mr. Braun stopped behind me. What? I asked. I'm going back to school, he said. Now he was acting crazy. Why? If the machine switched us, it could switch us back. Not without me, it can't, I said. Mr. Braun stood in the snow wearing my clothes and staring at me with my eyes. Don't you want to switch back? I don't know, I said. What do you mean, he asked. You can't just keep my body. Who says? I asked. I do. I smiled. Chill out, Sherman. I started through the snow toward the front door, but a few stops later, Mr. Braun was standing in the middle of a drift with a stunned look on my face. You say anything to my parents or sister about this, and you'll never get your body back. Understand? I warned him. You saw what happened with Alex. No one will believe you anyway. But it's true, he insisted. They'll have to believe me. Oh, sure, I grinned. Like people switch bodies every day. The funny thing was that my sister would have believed him because she had seen it happen before. But Mr. Braun didn't know that. As far as he knew, it had never happened before. I pushed open the front door and stamped my feet inside the mat. Mr. Braun, in my body, followed me in. That you, Jake? Jessica called from her room upstairs. I had to give Jake another nudge. Answer her, I whispered. Yeah, it's me, Mr. Braun, in my body, called upstairs. I left some lasagna for you in the kitchen, Jessica yelled. Mom and Dad called from the city. They didn't think they could get home in this weather, so they're staying at a hotel tonight. Make sure you feed Lance and let him out. I gave Mr. Braun, in my body, a meaningful look. Sure, he called upstairs. Mr. Braun's stomach was growling. You hungry, I asked. I guess. Well, I'm starved, I said. Come on. I headed for the kitchen and stepped over Lance's wooden gate. Lance was usually allowed everywhere in the house, but on the nights when my parents weren't around, we put the burglar alarm on and kept him in the kitchen so he wouldn't set it off accidentally. Grrr. On the other side of the kitchen, Lance stood up and growled when he saw me. The hair on his back rose and his tail dropped. He bared his teeth and attacked. Chapter 18. No, Lance, it's me, I shouted. Stop! Lance didn't seem to hear. At the last second, I jumped back over the gate. Ruff! Lance skidded into the gate and barked angrily. Hey, come on. I knelt down and got eye to eye with him. That's no way to treat an old friend, is it? Grrr, Lance still growled, but with less certainty than before. I pressed Mr. Braun's hand against the gate. Lance sniffed it warily. You better let me come in, I said. Otherwise, I can't give you dinner. Urf! At the word dinner, Lance started to smile and wag his tail. I stood up, winked at Mr. Braun in my body, and stepped over the gate again. I gave Lance dinner, but when I opened the kitchen door to let him out into the backyard, he took one look at all the snow and backed away. Can't say I blame you, I said, closing the kitchen door. Lance went back to his dog bed and lay down. I went over to the kitchen counter where half of a microwave lasagna dinner was covered with foil. That wasn't enough for me to eat, much less for me and Mr. Braun. Jake. That's when I noticed that he wasn't in the kitchen. Jake? I walked back to the gate. Jake, Mr. Braun was standing on the other side. Want something to eat? I asked. Mr. Braun nodded. Then come on in. I gestured for him to step over the gate. Mr. Braun hesitated. Where is he? Who? The dog. Lance? In here. Why? Mr. Braun in my body didn't answer. He didn't come into the kitchen either. He won't hurt you, I said. But how do you know? Because he didn't hurt me and he doesn't even know me, I said. He's known you all his life. But I don't know him, Mr. Braun said. Yes, you do, he said. You've known him since he was a puppy. Mr. Braun in my body scowled. I've never seen him before. I sighed. You've known him since he was a puppy because you're me, remember? Mr. Braun still didn't budge. Now, what's the problem? I asked. I don't like dogs. How can you not like dogs? I asked. Well, I just never... He didn't finish. Lance had gotten up to see who I was talking to. Mr. Braun in my body backed away. You mean you're scared of him? I had to smile. Mr. Braun grit my teeth. I don't believe it, I laughed. The great and mighty Mr. Braun is scared of a dog. What are you, a weenie? Mr. Braun clenched my fist and bristled. I pointed a muscular finger at him. Hey, I'd watch it if I were you. Don't forget what happened before the gym. Maybe you'd like to tell me what happened, someone said. Chapter 19. I looked up, surprised. Jessica was standing at the other end of the hall. Who are you, anyways? She asked warily. You look familiar. I'm the new physical education teacher at the middle school, I said. Why do I feel like I know you? Jessica asked. I glanced nervously at Mr. Braun in my body, but he shook his head as if he didn't know either. What are you doing here? My sister asked. Well, because of the snowstorm, I didn't think I could make it all the way home, I said. Jake was nice enough to invite me to stay here tonight. Don't you think you should have asked Mom and Dad first? Jessica directed the question at Jake. I guess, Mr. Braun in my body answered without a believable shrug. Jessica turned back to me. I'm not trying to be rude, Mr. Braun, I said. Mr. Braun, I'm not trying to be rude, Jessica said, but our parents aren't here and Jake knows he's supposed to ask for permission before he does something like this. I won't be a bother, I said, and I plan to leave first thing in the morning. By then, the roads will be plowed. I'll walk back to school, dig out my car, and go home. Jessica didn't look happy. She glanced at Jake. Where's he going to sleep? Jake's eyes darted toward me. The guest room in the basement, I said. How'd you know about that? Jessica scowled. Jake told me about it on the way here. Well, I guess that's all right. Jessica still didn't look happy. Just don't leave me a big mess in the kitchen, okay? Jessica was always bugging me about leaving the kitchen neat. Come with me, Lance. She clapped her hands. Lance got up and followed her back upstairs. I was glad because I was starving. I guess it took a lot of food to feed a body like Mr. Braun's. That half-finished lasagna was starting to look mighty tempting. You want any of this? I gestured to the lasagna, and Mr. Braun in my body came into the kitchen. Okay, I nodded my head. I've kind of been hoping to say no so I couldn't eat the whole thing myself. But being a courteous host, I chopped it in half with a knife and slid my half on a plate and ate it in 3 bites. Then I started rooting around the kitchen for more to eat. I made a triple-decker peanut butter and jelly sandwich and followed it up with a box of strawberry Pop-Tarts, a bowl of Frosted Flakes, and a bag of chips. I washed it all down with a liter of Coke. Meanwhile, Mr. Braun went through the refrigerator and took out stuff for a salad. For dinner, he had the remaining lasagna, salad with bread without butter, and a bowl of canned pineapple for dessert. Mr. Braun was real quiet while we ate. He looked almost like he was thinking. Want some chips? I asked, holding the bag out toward him. He shook his head. You eat like this all the time? Sure, I said. Only usually I don't eat as much. Do you have any idea how much cholesterol, saturated fat, sodium, sugar, and preservatives you've just consumed? He asked. I shrugged. Didn't really think about it. You have to stop eating this way, he said. I don't have to do anything. I grabbed another handful of chips and stuffed it into Mr. Braun's mouth. He sighed wearily. Listen, maybe you don't care what you do to your own body, but you could be a little more considerate of how you treat mine. Look who's talking, I said. You're the one that went around smashing my body into those tables in the gym. It's who, Mr. Braun said. What's who? I asked. You're the one who went around smashing the tables, he said. Not that went around. I stared at him in disbelief. You're correcting my English? You're just a kid. No, I'm a physical education teacher stuck in a kid's body, he replied. Whatever, I grumbled. Either way, don't tell me what to eat and don't tell me how to talk, okay? Mr. Braun narrowed my eyes at me. You know, Sherman, Mr. Braun, to you, dimwad. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly as if he were seething or something. You know, someday we're going to have to switch back. And when we do, you're going to be one very sorry little punk. He rolled his eyes like I was really supposed to be scared. Dream on, weenie. Chapter 20. School was canceled the next day. In the morning, Alex called about shoveling snow, but Mr. Braun begged off. We walked over to his place instead. I didn't think he wanted to show me where he lived, but I told him I couldn't stay at my house anymore. It would be too weird for Mr. Braun to sleep there 2 nights in a row. And besides, I said, my parents will be coming home later. They're going to think it's really bizarre that my gym teacher is staying over 2 nights in a row. Mr. Braun in my body smiled like he thought he had the upper hand. Hey, that's not my problem. Oh yeah, I said. Well, if you don't let me stay at your place, I'll have to sleep in the church basement with the homeless people, and I'll probably wind up getting head lice. A V formed in my forehead. Okay, I'll take you there. But so help me, If you wreck anything, I'll save it, Weenie, I growled. Mr. Braun lived on the second floor of a 2-story garden apartment complex. On the way there, he lectured me about how I better take good care of his place and be nice to his neighbors and stuff like that. Finally, we got there. Mr. Braun lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. You never saw any place so neat and clean. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Muscle magazines with covers of unnaturally muscular men and women were piled neatly on the coffee table. The kitchen was clean and shiny. About 20 large bottles of pills were lined up on the counter. Mr. Braun went over to all of them. These 2 are amino acids, he said. Here's your lactose-free whey protein. This is your beta-carotene, vitamin B12, E, C, and bioflavonoids. Here you've got your iron, zinc, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and boron. And here he suddenly stopped. A semi-goofy look came over my face. Sounds like I eat the natural resources of Montana every morning, doesn't it? I wasn't sure if he was kidding or not. Does all this stuff really come from Montana? Mr. Braun scowled at me. Forget it, Sherman. The point is, as long as you're in my body, this is what you have to take every day. And this is what you're going to eat. He opened up his refrigerator, which was filled with vegetables, fruits, whole grain breads, and junk like that. Then he gave me this big lecture of how, if I was going to use his body, I had an obligation to eat all the stuff instead of the garbage I normally ate. Okay, fine, it's a deal, I said, hoping to get him to leave so I can go out and get some chips and stuff. But Mr. Braun wasn't finished. Now we'll go over to the burn center, he said. Why? Mr. Braun pointed at me. Because this body takes work. All right, so that's where we're going to stop for today. We'll continue reading this on another video, and I'll see you guys later.